Welcome to the third video on World War II, the Eastern Front. Now, in the West, the Soviet Union faced a new threat, the rise of Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. But for the moment, Hitler and Stalin chose to ignore each other. Stalin was unleashing an unprecedented amount of oppression and terror upon his own people. And Adolf Hitler was busy building the most powerful army the world has ever seen. And this was a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. But France and England also chose to ignore Hitler, a price which they would pay dearly for in a few years. By 1936, Adolf Hitler and Germany were no longer hiding the fact they were breaking the Treaty of Versailles. Newsreels were shown around the world showing massive Nazi marches and celebrations. And this was a message to the world that Germany was back. And even though this was a flagrant violation of the Treaty of Versailles, the West did nothing. In October of 1936, Italy and Germany formed the Axis Alliance, and it was about to get worse, because Adolf Hitler didn't build his army for nothing. He intended to use this ever-growing and stronger army against his neighbors, particularly Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. But first, Austria was in his sights, and through threats and intimidation, he forced the Austrian government to hand over the keys to Austria. And so literally overnight, Austria and Germany became one. And eager German troops marched into Austria unopposed. No shot was fired, and the West again was nearly mute. The acquisition of Austria would turn out to be Hitler's easiest endeavor, because the Austrians were primarily ethnic Germans, and they shared a common culture with Germany. Now, next on Hitler's hit list was Czechoslovakia. Now, Czechoslovakia had a minority ethnic German population, which you can see in that map on the bottom in the areas that are dark purple. It was this minority ethnic German population that Hitler wanted to use as a pretext for an eventual larger scale invasion of Czechoslovakia. But for now, he wanted to play deal maker, and he only demanded that Czechoslovakia hand over the areas that contained a majority of ethnic Germans. But Czechoslovakia refused, because as you can see, the majority of the minority ethnic German population was on the borders of Germany, and Czechoslovakia had recently built up their military defenses along this border in anticipation of a German attack. But unfortunately for Czechoslovakia, Britain and France wanted to also deal with Hitler. They demanded that Czechoslovakia hand over the areas requested by Hitler, and in return they would force Hitler to sign a treaty in which he would promise not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. But again, the Czechoslovakians were weary of this because this would give up all of the defenses that they had spent years building up. But after much prodding from the West, Czechoslovakia agreed, and the areas were handed over to Germany, and Hitler entered the Sudetenland as a liberator, as you can see on the right. And so France and Britain hoped that that would be the end of it, and now Hitler would just go away. But to Hitler, these agreements were just mere scraps of paper, and in March 1939, he broke yet another treaty and invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. The Czechoslovakians would never forgive the West for their blunders in dealing with Hitler. Hitler's next target was Poland, and he made his usual demands to the Polish to hand over territory. But Poland refused, and this time Britain and France drew a red line. If Germany invaded Poland, war would be declared. And so now it seemed Europe was on the verge of yet another war. But Poland presented a problem for Hitler. If he invaded Poland, that would push him dangerously close to the Western Soviet Union and might prompt a Soviet invasion. And Hitler, even at this point, did not want to risk a two-front engagement against France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. And so through his foreign minister Ribbentrop, Hitler sent overtures to Stalin and the Soviet Union to sign an agreement. And in August of 1939, the Soviet Union and Germany shocked the entire world by signing a non-aggression pact. But there was a darker side to this agreement that was kept secret. Germany and the Soviet Union would carve Poland up in half. And so as the ink dried on the agreement, Poland was essentially no more. And this would allow Hitler, after Poland, to focus on the combined force of France and England. Now, there were several reasons why Stalin signed this pact. First was he did not want to fight the West war. In his opinion, it would be the Soviet Union that would be shedding most of the blood in a struggle against Germany. Stalin also had an inherent distrust of everything the West said and did, and he needed only to look at the fiasco involving Czechoslovakia. And he didn't want to let Hitler have all the fun. If the Germans were going to seize Poland, he felt it was his duty to expand the borders of the Western Soviet Union into Poland as well. And perhaps most importantly, this would give Stalin time to reform the Red Army. especially after the military purges in 1937. And so with that, Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. 3 days later, France and Britain declared war on Germany. But they launched no attack on Germany and sent no troops to assist Poland. So Poland was essentially on its own. While the Poles were facing a ferocious German onslaught in the west, the Soviet Union kept its end of the bargain and invaded from the east. And so now Poland was facing the impossible task of fighting a two-front war against Germany and the Soviet Union. And so many Polish divisions retreated out of the trap that was forming. And just a few weeks later, Poland capitulated in early October of 1939. The fall of Poland now let Germany square off against France and Britain. But there would be no fighting in the winter of 1940, and both sides seemed willing to allow a lull in the fighting. And this has been called the Phony War, because many French soldiers were staring at German soldiers right across the border. But as I said, no action took place during the winter of 1940. And then on May 10th, 1940, the Germans unleashed their full blitzkrieg on France and the Low Countries. And in a daring move, the Germans outflanked the Maginot Line and drove the British Expeditionary Force and several French divisions into the sea at Dunkirk. And in one of the most spectacular escapes in military history, most of the British and French forces were able to evacuate by sea to the coast of Britain. And with that, most of the French army that was situated in front of Paris was left on its own. And those remaining French forces fought valiantly, but on June 14th, Paris fell. And stunned Parisian citizens saw the German army march in parade past the Arc de Triomphe. And just a few days later, on June 22nd, an armistice was signed between France and Germany. And so Germany's revenge for the loss of World War I was complete. And so Hitler's armies had achieved in a few weeks what the German army during World War I failed to do in 4 years. It was a swift and stunning defeat. The speed of the German victory stunned Stalin and the Kremlin. They had expected a long and protracted struggle between Germany and the Allies. As a result, the military reforms were sped up. Hitler now ordered his generals to plan an invasion of Britain. But first, the British Navy had to be eliminated, and the Royal Air Force had to be neutralized. When that failed to happen, Hitler looked east towards the Soviet Union. But by now, it was late summer in the year of 1940. But Hitler still wanted a fall campaign against the Soviet Union. And so he ordered his generals to plan an attack. But the German High Command vehemently opposed this, especially the Army Chief of Staff, Franz Halder. He was convinced that the German army was not prepared to fight the Soviet Union in a winter war, and so he pleaded with Hitler to push back the date. And after some debate, Hitler finally agreed to delay the attack until the spring of 1941, when the weather would be more suitable. During that time, there were further land grabs by both the Soviet Union and Germany. The Germans allied with Finland, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. And through a lightning campaign, Germany seized Yugoslavia, Greece, Crete, and even parts of North Africa. It seemed wherever the German army went, it was invincible. And on December 18, 1940, Hitler signed War Directive Number 21, which would be the order to invade the Soviet Union. And it would be known as Operation Barbarossa. And we will get to some of the planning and tactics involved in the next video.